Rebecca Martinez had perfected the art of being invisible. At 35, she moved through Murphy's Roadhouse like a ghost in sneakers. Her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her white server's shirt hanging loose on her slight frame. Everything about her whispered ordinary, forgettable, weak. But appearances, as the Desert Vipers Motorcycle Club would soon discover, could be devastatingly deceiving. The evening had started like any other Saturday at the roadside bar near Camp Pendleton. Rebecca methodically folded napkins at the service station, each triangle identical to the last, her movements precise and economical. She'd been working at Murphy's for 8 months now, and the routine had become her sanctuary. Serve drinks, wipe tables, collect tips, go home to her small apartment where nobody asked questions about the nightmares that woke her at 3 in the morning. Tommy, the 24-year-old bartender, whistled tunelessly as he restocked glasses. He'd noticed things about Rebecca during their shifts together. The way she arranged condiments with geometric accuracy. How she never had her back to the door for more than a few seconds. The military precision in everything she did. But whenever he tried to ask about her past, she'd deflect with a gentle smile and change the subject. "You ever think about doing something else?" Tommy had asked her once during a slow Tuesday shift. "I mean, you seem like you could handle more responsibility, maybe management or something." Rebecca had simply shrugged, continuing to clean the already spotless counter. "I like it here. It's peaceful. Peaceful." The word had become her mantra, her goal, her desperate hope. After everything she'd seen and done, peace felt like the most precious thing in the world. She'd found it in the simple rhythm of serving coffee to construction workers and listening to old veterans tell their stories. They never pressed her for details about her own service, sensing somehow that those waters ran deeper and darker than most were prepared to navigate. Sheriff David Coleman was a regular, usually stopping by for coffee before his evening patrol. The 57-year-old lawman had done 2 tours in Iraq before coming home to serve and protect his community. He tried a few times to draw Rebecca into conversation about military life, recognizing something familiar in her bearing, but she always steered the conversation back to his needs. More coffee, fresh pie, anything to avoid talking about herself. "You remind me of someone I knew overseas," he'd said one evening, studying her face carefully. "Had that same way of watching everything without seeming to watch. I just pay attention." "To my tables," Rebecca had replied softly. "Makes for better tips." The lie came easily, but Sheriff Coleman's eyes had narrowed slightly. In his experience, people who watched everything the way Rebecca did had learned that survival depended on constant awareness. But he'd let it slide, filing the observation away for future reference. Tonight felt different from the moment Rebecca tied on her apron. There was tension in the air, an electric quality that made her fingers unconsciously move to the small piece of metal hanging from a chain around her neck. Hidden beneath her loose shirt, the worn dog tag was warm against her skin, a reminder of who she used to be, who she was trying not to be anymore. The regular customers seemed to sense it too. The usual crowd of veterans from the nearby base and local blue-collar workers shifted uneasily in their seats, glancing frequently toward the parking lot. Even the jukebox seemed subdued, playing softer than usual. Rebecca checked her phone. The military-grade device's reinforced aluminum casing cool against her palm. The encrypted communication capabilities and satellite connectivity were holdovers from another life, habits she couldn't break even in civilian anonymity. The specialized security features meant she could call for backup that would actually understand tactical situations, though she'd sworn to herself she'd never need those contacts again. "Expecting trouble?" Tommy asked, noticing her checking the time. "Just keeping track of the evening," she said, but her eyes moved to the windows overlooking the parking lot. Something was coming. She could feel it the way old sailors feel storms. On the horizon dot at exactly 8 o'clock, the first rumble of motorcycle engines reached their ears. Not the casual weekend riders who sometimes stopped for beer and wings, but something else entirely. The deep, aggressive roar of machines built for intimidation as much as transportation. Rebecca's hand moved unconsciously to her lower back, where she kept a compact medical kit hidden beneath her server's apron. The professional-grade trauma supplies included military hemostatic agents and combat medications designed for battlefield emergencies, tools she still carried because a Marine is always prepared. "Desert Vipers," Sheriff Coleman said quietly. From his corner booth, his weathered hand moving instinctively toward his hip where his service weapon rested. "I was hoping they'd stick to the coast." Rebecca had heard the name whispered in fearful tones by other bar owners along the highway. 3 establishments in the past month had mysteriously caught fire after refusing their protection services. 2 owners had ended up in the hospital with injuries they claimed came from accidents, though everyone knew better. The engines grew louder, and through the window, Rebecca could see the headlights cutting through the desert darkness. 10 bikes, arranged in a formation that spoke of military training adapted for criminal purposes. Her trained eye automatically cataloged details. The way they positioned themselves to control access and escape routes, the disciplined manner in which they dismounted, the casual but purposeful way they surveyed the area before approaching the entrance. "Tommy," she said quietly, "maybe you should call Mr. Murphy. He's in Phoenix until Thursday, remember? Won't be back for 3 days." Rebecca nodded, filing away the information. Bad timing, but Marines learned to work with what they had, not what they wished they had. She straightened her shoulders slightly, feeling muscle memory awakening despite her desperate desire to remain invisible. The door burst open with unnecessary force, announcing the arrival of their leader before he even stepped through the threshold. Vincent Viper Thompson stood 6 feet 3 inches tall, his massive frame filling the doorway like a conquering hero. The snake tattoo that earned him his nickname started at his jawline and disappeared into his leather vest, and his shaved head gleamed under the bar's amber lights. "Evening, folks," Viper announced to the dozen patrons, his voice carrying that particular tone of false friendliness that preceded violence. "Don't mind us. We're just here for a friendly drink and a little business discussion." His 9 companions spread out behind him in what Rebecca quietly noted was a tactically sound dispersal pattern. They covered exits, maintained sightlines, and established dominance over the space with practiced efficiency. These weren't random thugs playing dress-up. Someone had trained them well. Rebecca approached their table with her order pad, keeping her eyes down and her voice soft. The submissive posture was calculated, designed to avoid drawing attention while she assessed the threat level. "What can I get you, gentlemen?" That's when the first warning sign appeared. One of the bikers, a wiry man with rotted teeth and prison tattoos, slapped her backside as she walked past. "How about you start with a smile, sweetheart? You look like someone died." Rebecca stepped out of reach with a fluid movement that looked accidental, but wasn't, continuing to take their orders without acknowledging the assault. From behind the bar, Tommy's young face flushed with anger, his hand moving toward the baseball that they kept for emergencies. But Rebecca caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Not yet." Wait. The bikers ordered beer, lots of it, and Rebecca served them efficiently and quietly. That's when she felt the weight of Viper's attention settle on her like a physical thing. He studied her with the cold calculation of a predator sizing up prey, noting her careful movements, her downcast eyes, her apparent vulnerability. What Viper couldn't see was the warrior assessing him in return. Rebecca had cataloged every weapon visible on his person, identified the positioning weaknesses in his cruise formation, and calculated the precise force required to disable him should the situation deteriorate. But more than anything, she hoped it wouldn't come to that. She'd come to Murphy's seeking peace, and violence would shatter that fragile sanctuary forever. The tension in the room was building like pressure in a boiler, and Rebecca could sense they were approaching a decision point. Whatever business the Desert Vipers had come to conduct, it was about to begin. She finished wiping down a nearby table, her movements steady despite the growing certainty that her carefully constructed peaceful existence was about to come to an explosive end. The atmosphere in Murphy's Roadhouse grew heavier with each passing minute as the Desert Vipers settled into their territory like an occupying force. Rebecca continued her duties with mechanical precision, but every instinct honed through 3 combat tours was screaming warnings. These men hadn't come for beer and casual conversation. "Hey, server girl," Viper's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. "Where's Murphy? We need to discuss some business." Rebecca paused in her table wiping, not looking up. "Mr. Murphy is in Phoenix for the week. I'm just covering shifts." A ripple of murmurs passed between the bikers. This wasn't the news they'd wanted to hear. Viper's expression darkened as he processed the information, clearly frustrated that his carefully planned intimidation visit had hit an unexpected snag. "Well then," Viper stood up, his massive frame casting a shadow over Rebecca's slight figure. "I guess you'll have to relay a message for us." The 9 other Desert Vipers had unconsciously formed what Rebecca recognized as an encirclement pattern. In military tactics, it was designed to prevent escape and maximize psychological pressure. But their positioning had a fatal flaw that only someone with her training would notice. The man by the jukebox was favoring his left leg, probably an old injury. The 2 by the pool table were more focused on looking intimidating than maintaining tactical awareness. And Viper himself was standing too close, inside what combat instructors called the reactionary gap. "Tell Murphy that the Desert Vipers are offering our protection services to this fine establishment," Viper continued, pulling out a gold lighter and flicking it open and closed with practiced menace. "$5,000 a month, and we guarantee nothing bad happens to this place." Rebecca's fingers found the dog tag beneath her shirt, the metal warm against her skin. 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. 15 confirmed kills, probably twice that unconfirmed. 4 bronze stars and a purple heart, all locked away in a storage unit along with her dress blues and gunnery sergeant chevrons. She'd come here to escape that life, to be nobody special, to serve coffee without having blood on her hands. "I'll let him know you stopped by," she said quietly, continuing to clean the already spotless table. The calculated submission in her voice seemed to irritate Viper more than defiance would have. He stepped closer, violating her personal space with deliberate aggression. "I don't think you understand, sweetheart. This isn't a social call. This is a business requirement." From his corner booth, Sheriff Coleman's hand moved closer to his service weapon. The lawman's combat experience was telling him the same thing Rebecca's was. This situation was escalating toward violence, and the only question was who would draw first blood. "Every bar from here to San Diego is under our protection," Viper continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Those that refuse our generous offer." He snapped the lighter shut with an ominous click. "Well, accidents happen. Electrical. Fires, gas leaks, tragic stuff." "I understand," Rebecca replied softly. "But I can't make decisions for Mr. Murphy. I just serve drinks and clean tables." What she didn't say was that she'd already memorized the license plates of all 10 motorcycles, noted which bikers were carrying concealed weapons, and identified at least 3 different ways to neutralize the immediate threat if necessary. The medical kit at her back contained more than just trauma supplies. Habits from her previous life had led her to include items that could be repurposed for tactical applications if the situation demanded it. Tommy, the young bartender, was sweating. Now, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the bar. He'd never seen anything like this outside of movies, and the casual way the bikers discussed arson and violence made his stomach turn. Rebecca caught his eye and mouthed a single word: "Stay." "Look," Viper said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I'm trying to be nice here, but you're making this difficult." He leaned down until his face was inches from hers, his breath reeking of whiskey and cigarettes. "How about this? You seem like a smart girl. You convince Murphy to see things our way, and maybe I'll throw in a little bonus for you. What do you make here? Minimum wage plus tips?" His eyes roamed over her slight frame with obvious contempt. "I could make sure you're taken care of, if you know what I mean." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Several patrons shifted in their seats, recognizing the threat for what it was. But Rebecca's voice remained steady, almost serene, which seemed to infuriate Viper more than fear would have. "Thank you, but I'm fine with my current arrangement." That's when he made his first crucial mistake. His meaty fingers wrapped around her upper arm, squeezing hard enough to leave bruises. "Listen here, you stuck-up little. I'm gonna have to ask you to take your hand off the lady." Sheriff Coleman had stood up, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Even in civilian clothes, he had that unmistakable bearing of a career soldier turned lawman. The badge clipped to his belt caught the light, adding official weight to his words. Viper laughed, not releasing Rebecca's arm. "And what are you going to do about it, old man? You're off duty, outnumbered 10-1, and this isn't your jurisdiction. Sit back down before you get hurt." But Sheriff Coleman didn't back down. And several other patrons, Rebecca noticed, were wearing unit pins or military tattoos, had shifted in their seats. The Aaron Murphys had grown thick with the promise of violence, and Rebecca could see the calculations running behind everyone's eyes. "Tommy, it's okay," she said softly, using the bartender's first name for the first time in 8 months. These gentlemen were just leaving. That's when Viper made his second, and ultimately fatal, mistake. He yanked her closer, his other hand reaching for her collar. "You don't tell us when we leave. We leave when we're good and ready. And right now, I'm thinking we need to teach this whole bar a lesson about respect." The sound of chairs scraping against the floor filled the bar as more patrons stood up. Tommy grabbed a baseball bat from behind the bar. But Viper's attention was entirely focused on Rebecca, on establishing dominance, on breaking what he saw as inappropriate resistance from someone who should have been cowering. "You know what your problem is?" he snarled, his face inches from hers. "You think you're better than us. Think you're too good to show proper respect. Maybe I need to remind you of your place." His free hand grabbed the front of her shirt, bunching the white cotton in his fist. Rebecca remained perfectly still, her breathing controlled, her eyes steady. To everyone watching, she looked like a terrified server trying not to provoke more violence. But Sheriff Coleman, with his 2 combat tours worth of experience, saw something else entirely. The way her weight had shifted to the balls of her feet. The way her hands had positioned themselves for maximum leverage. The way she'd angled her body to create space for movement while appearing completely passive. "Last chance," Viper growled, spittle flying from his lips. "You're going to call Murphy right now and tell him he's got a new business partner, or things are going to get very unpleasant for everyone here." Rebecca looked up at him with those calm brown eyes, and for just a moment, Viper caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. It was like looking into the eyes of a shark, ancient, patient, and absolutely without fear. "I can't do that," she said simply, and then he ripped her shirt. The sound of tearing fabric was sharp and final, echoing through Murphy's Roadhouse like a gunshot. Rebecca stumbled backward as Viper yanked with all his considerable strength, the white cotton parting from collar to mid-chest. The ruined shirt hung open, revealing the black tank top underneath. But it was what that tank top revealed that changed everything. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the jukebox seemed to pause between songs, as if the universe itself needed a moment to process what had just been exposed. Across Rebecca Martinez's back, visible through the thin fabric of the tank top, was a work of art that told a story of service, sacrifice, and elite warrior status. The eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps spread majestically. Across her shoulder blades, the detailed artwork so precise you could make out individual feathers on the eagle's wings. But it was the text beneath that made several veterans in the bar gasp audibly. First Force Recon was inked in bold letters, marking her as a member of one of the most elite special operations units in the Marine Corps. Below that, her designation, Gunny R. Martinez 0311, the military occupational specialty code for infantry, the tip of the spear, the ones who go where others fear to tread. But the tattoo was only part of the story. Surrounding it were scars that told their own tales to those who knew how to read them. A puckered bullet wound near her left shoulder blade, the telltale marks of shrapnel along her ribs, a long jagged scar that disappeared beneath the tank top's hem, suggesting a blade wound that had required serious medical attention. Viper Thompson stood frozen, his hands still clutching the torn fabric, his mouth slightly open as his brain tried to process what he was seeing. Behind him, his fellow Desert Vipers had gone equally still, the predatory confidence draining from their faces like water from a broken cup. Force Recon, Sheriff Coleman breathed, his voice carrying clearly in the silence. Holy hell. The transformation in Rebecca's bearing was subtle but unmistakable. She hadn't moved, hadn't taken a fighting stance, hadn't done anything overtly threatening. But something in the way she held herself had changed, like a switch being flipped from civilian to warrior. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, and when she finally spoke, her voice had lost its soft, submissive quality. "Mr. Thompson," she said, using Viper's real name, which she shouldn't have known, "I believe you owe me an apology for destroying my property." The shift in the room's atmosphere was palpable, like the pressure change before a thunderstorm. Viper's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally the dawning realization that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. "How do you know my name?" His voice had lost its commanding bass, climbing higher. With uncertainty, Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned slowly, giving everyone in the bar a clear view of the military artwork and battle scars that decorated her back. Several phones had appeared, patrons recording what they sensed was a moment they'd want to remember. "Vincent Thompson," she said calmly, "dishonorably discharged from the Army 7 years ago for stealing and selling military equipment. Founded the Desert Vipers 4 years ago, currently wanted for questioning in 5 arson cases and 3 aggravated assaults." She paused, letting that sink in. "I make it my business to know who's threatening the establishments in my area of operation." "Your area of ... Viper started, then stopped, the full implications hitting him like a sledgehammer. From the corner, Booth, a grizzled man in his 60s, slowly stood up. Rebecca had served him coffee every Tuesday for 8 months, never knowing he was Colonel Michael Harrison, retired Medal of Honor recipient and current military liaison for the county. "Gunnery. Sergeant Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the snap of command despite his civilian clothes. "First Force Recon. I remember you now. Operation Phantom Fury, Fallujah, 2004. Rebecca's stance shifted slightly, an unconscious response to a superior officer. "Sir, you're the one who held that schoolhouse for 17 hours. with a broken rifle and 3 magazines of ammunition while the evac choppers tried to get through. It wasn't a question. I had help, sir. Lance Corporal Williams and PFC Thompson. Her voice caught slightly on the names. They didn't make it out. Another patron stood up, Maria Santos, who ran the flower shop down the street. Nobody knew. She'd been a Navy corpsman attached to Marine units in Afghanistan. I was at Camp Leatherneck when they brought you in, Maria said softly. 60% burns, 3 bullet wounds, enough shrapnel in you to set off a metal detector at 50 yards. The doctor said you'd never walk again. Doctors can be wrong, Rebecca said simply. The Desert Vipers were backing toward the door now, their earlier formation completely broken, but they found their path blocked by 5 men who had quietly repositioned themselves during the conversation. Each one had the bearing of someone who'd seen real combat, not the bar fights and intimidation tactics the bikers were used to. Leaving so soon? Asked one of them, a Hispanic man with sergeant stripes tattooed on his forearm. But you haven't apologized to the lady yet. Viper's face flushed red, caught between humiliation and his need to maintain face in front of his crew. Look, we didn't know she was. If we'd known ... known what? Rebecca stepped forward, and despite being merely a foot shorter than Viper, he took an involuntary step back. That I bled for this country? That I'd earned the right to be treated with basic human dignity? Or just that I could hurt you in ways you can't even imagine? The weight of her words settled over the room like a physical presence. Here was a woman who had literally given her body as a shield for innocence, who had paid in blood and burns, and bullets for the safety of children she'd never met. And she'd been content to disappear into anonymity, serving beer and wiping tables until these criminals had forced her hand. All of the above, Viper admitted, his voice small. Sheriff. Coleman moved closer, his hand resting casually on his phone. Ms. Martinez, would you like to press charges for assault? We have plenty of witnesses to the unwanted touching and destruction of property. Rebecca considered for a moment, then shook her head. No need, Sheriff. I think Mr. Thompson and his friends were just leaving, and they won't be back. Will you, Mr. Thompson? The threat in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. This wasn't just a server asking nicely. This was a warrior giving a direct order to someone she considered beneath her notice. Viper nodded rapidly, his shaved head bobbing like a dashboard. Ornament. No, ma'am, we won't be back. In fact, we'll make sure everyone knows Murphy's is off limits. Completely off limits. And the other establishments you've been threatening? Rebecca's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. We'll reconsider our business model, Viper stammered. Kneel. The command cracked like a whip, and Viper found himself dropping to his knees before his conscious mind could process what was happening. It was the voice of someone used to absolute obedience in life or death situations, and his body responded before his pride could interfere. The humiliation was complete and absolute, witnessed by his entire crew and a bar full of civilians who now knew exactly what kind of men they really were. Bullies who folded the moment they met real strength. The sight of Vincent Viper Thompson on his knees in front of a woman half his size sent shockwaves through both his crew and the bars. Patrons. Rebecca Martinez stood over him with the calm authority of someone who had commanded respect in places where respect was earned through blood and courage, not intimidation and violence. Ma'am, Viper looked up at her, confusion and terror warring in his eyes. The cocky biker who had swaggered through the door 30 minutes ago was gone, replaced by a man who suddenly understood he was completely out of his depth. You assaulted me, destroyed my property, threatened my workplace and my colleagues. Rebecca's voice was calm, almost conversational, but every word carried the weight of absolute authority. In some parts of the world I've operated in, you'd already be dead. But we do things differently here. The Desert Viper's crew stood frozen, unsure whether to help their leader or flee. They built their reputation on terrorizing small business owners and intimidating civilians, but nothing in their experience had prepared them for this. The woman they dismissed as weak and vulnerable had just revealed herself to be everything they pretended to be, a genuine warrior with the scars to prove it. "So you're going to apologize properly," Rebecca continued, "and then you're going to leave. And you're going to spread the word that this entire county is under the protection of Marines who've seen scarier things than you on our easiest days." Tommy, the young bartender, watched with wide eyes as Viper struggled to find words. The same man who had casually discussed burning down buildings was now trembling as he tried to form a coherent apology. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so completely that it felt like watching reality reorganize itself. "I am sorry," Viper stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry for touching you, for threatening you, for destroying your shirt. I had no right, and we won't bother you or this place again." But Rebecca wasn't finished. "What about the other businesses you've been extorting? The owners you've put in the hospital? The buildings you've burned down?" Viper's face went pale. He'd assumed his crew's activities were unknown to law enforcement. But this woman seemed to know details that even the police hadn't connected to them yet. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Rossetti's Pizza in Oceanside," Rebecca said matter-of-factly. "Electrical fire last month, right after the owner refused your protection services. Funny how the fire started in 3 different locations simultaneously. Takes skill to pull off an arson that sophisticated." Sheriff Coleman's eyes sharpened. The Rossetti fire had been under investigation, but they'd lacked evidence to connect it to the Desert Vipers. Now he was hearing what sounded suspiciously like a confession. "And the Martinez family's restaurant in Escondido," Rebecca continued relentlessly. "Owner's wife ended up with 2 broken ribs after she fell down some stairs the day after they told you they wouldn't pay. Remarkable how clumsy people become when they cross your organization." Each revelation hit Viper like a physical blow. This woman wasn't just a former Marine. She was someone with access to intelligence networks that had been tracking his crew's activities with military precision. The implications were terrifying. "Here's what's going to happen," Rebecca said, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone giving non-negotiable orders. "You're going to contact every business owner you've threatened or extorted. You're going to apologize and make it clear that you're no longer in the protection business. You're going to compensate them for any damages your organization has caused. But we don't have that kind of money." One of the crew members protested. Rebecca turned her gaze on him, and he immediately regretted speaking. "Then you'll figure it out. Sell the motorcycles if you have to. Get real jobs. Learn what honest work feels like." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her military-grade phone, its reinforced casing gleaming under the bar's lights. With a few quick movements, she accessed encrypted files that contained photographic evidence of the Desert Viper's criminal activities. "I've been documenting your organization's activities for the past 6 months, she said, showing them pictures of themselves entering and leading crime scenes. Every victim, every threat, every act of vandalism. All of it time-stamped and geotagged with military precision accuracy." Viper's blood turned to ice. The scope of the surveillance was overwhelming, suggesting resources and expertise far beyond what any civilian should possess. "Who are you really?" "I'm someone who came here looking for peace," Rebecca replied. "Someone who wanted to serve coffee and wipe tables and forget what it feels like to have blood on her hands. But you took that from me tonight." Colonel Harrison stepped forward, his Medal of Honor recipients bearing commanding immediate attention. "Gunny Martinez, if you don't mind my asking, what are you doing here? With your record, you could be anywhere. Private security, federal law enforcement, teaching at Quantico." Rebecca picked up her torn shirt from the floor, folding it with the same precision she'd shown with everything else. "With respect, sir, I've done my time being extraordinary. I've been the tip of the spear, the first one through the door, the last one out. I've got 47 confirmed kills, and probably twice that unconfirmed." She paused, her voice growing softer but no less intense. "I've got a box full of medals in a storage unit and nightmares that wake me up at 0300. Every night. I came here because nobody knew who I was. Because I could pour coffee for construction workers and not have them thank me for my service with that look in their eyes." "What look?" Tommy asked quietly. "The one that's equal parts awe and pity and fear," Rebecca said, moving behind the bar to pull out a spare Murphy's Roadhouse shirt from the employee cubby. "The look that reminds you that you're different, that you've seen and done things that separate you from normal people forever." Sheriff Coleman was furiously taking notes on his phone, recording every admission the bikers had made. The evidence Rebecca had provided would be enough to bring down their entire operation, assuming she was willing to testify. "Ma'am," he said, "respectfully, I'm going to need you to come to the station tomorrow. If you're willing to share that intelligence with us officially, we can shut these criminals down permanently." Rebecca nodded, slipping on the fresh shirt and buttoning it. With steady hands, "I'll be there, Sheriff. It's time these predators face real consequences." Viper, still on his knees, looked up at her with something approaching desperate hope. "If we do what you're asking, if we make things right, will you destroy that evidence?" Rebecca's smile was colder than a desert night. "Mr. Thompson, I spent 3 tours learning that some people only understand consequences. You'll make things right because it's the right thing to do, not because you're afraid of getting caught. But the evidence stays exactly where it is. Insurance against any future lapses in judgment." The message was clear. Their criminal enterprise was finished, whether they cooperated or not. The only question was whether they'd face justice willingly or be dragged to it, kicking and screaming as the bikers slowly stood up. Their leader still shaken by the encounter. Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of using her skills for protection rather than destruction. For the first time since leaving the Corps, she was remembering why she'd become a Marine in the first place. The next 24 hours transformed Murphy's Roadhouse from a simple roadside bar into the epicenter of the biggest organized crime takedown in the county's recent history. Word had spread through law enforcement circles with the speed of digital communication, and by noon the following day, federal agents were setting up a temporary command center in the back room where Rebecca had once quietly folded napkins. Rebecca sat across from Detective Lisa Richardson and FBI Agent David Walsh, a military record spread across the table like evidence in a court case. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the decorations that regular customers had brought over the past 8 months. Military patches, unit photos, and memorabilia that had turned one wall into an unofficial veterans memorial. "Gunnery, Sergeant Martinez," Agent Walsh said, reviewing her service record with obvious respect. "Your file reads like something out of a military thriller. 3 tours, 15 confirmed kills, 4 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, and commendations for actions that are still classified." Rebecca sipped her coffee, the same blend she'd been serving to customers for months. "I did my job, Agent Walsh. Nothing more, nothing less. Your job included single-handedly holding a schoolhouse full of civilians against insurgent forces for 17 hours with a broken weapon and limited ammunition," Detective Richardson interjected. "The after-action report calls it one of the most remarkable displays of courage and tactical brilliance in modern military history." "Williams and Thompson were there too," Rebecca said quietly. "They died protecting those children. I just survived." "Agent." Walsh leaned forward, his expression serious. "The intelligence you've gathered on the Desert Vipers is remarkable. Military-grade surveillance, encrypted communications intercepts, financial records we didn't even know existed. This isn't the work of a civilian." Rebecca's phone buzzed on. The table, its reinforced military casing gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The device represented habits she couldn't break, connections she couldn't sever, skills that apparently would never let her become truly invisible. "Old habits," she said simply. "Once a Marine, always a Marine." When I saw what they were doing to local businesses, I started documenting everything. Force of habit more than any grand plan. The evidence she'd provided was staggering in its scope and detail. Financial records showing money laundering through motorcycle dealerships. Recorded conversations obtained through sophisticated surveillance equipment. Photographs of criminal activities taken with professional-grade cameras. It was the kind of intelligence package that took federal task forces months to assemble. "The question is," Detective Richardson said, "are you willing to testify? Because with your evidence and testimony, we can put Vincent Thompson and his entire organization away for decades." Rebecca considered this carefully. Testifying meant stepping back into the spotlight she'd worked so hard to escape. It meant facing defense attorneys who would try to tear apart her credibility by dragging her military service through public scrutiny. It meant the end of her quiet anonymity. "Those business owners deserve justice," she said finally. "The people they've terrorized and extorted deserve to know their tormentors will face consequences. Yes, I'll testify." Agent Walsh smiled for the first time since arriving. "Outstanding. We'll need to go over your evidence in detail, prepare your testimony, and arrange for your protection during the trial." "Protection?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Agent Walsh, I held off 50 insurgents with a broken rifle. I think I can handle a few disgruntled bikers." The agent chuckled, but his expression remained serious. "Standard procedure, gunnery sergeant. Besides, your testimony is going to destroy a criminal organization that's been operating with impunity for years. That makes you valuable to us and dangerous to them." Tommy approached the table cautiously, carrying a fresh pot of coffee. The young bartender had barely slept the previous night, his mind reeling from the revelation that his quiet coworker was a decorated war hero. "Sorry to interrupt, but there are reporters outside asking questions." Rebecca sighed, glancing toward the windows where she could see news vans setting up in the parking lot. "How many?" "6 so far, but more keep arriving. They're calling you the biker bar marine and asking about a movie deal." "No interviews," Rebecca said firmly. "Not now, not ever. This isn't about me becoming famous. It's about justice for the people these criminals have victimized." Detective Richardson made a note in her file. "We can arrange a back exit when you're ready to leave. The media attention will die down once the initial story runs its course." But even as she said it, Richardson doubted her own words. The story of a decorated Force Recon Marine working incognito as a small-town server, then single-handedly bringing down a criminal organization, was the kind of tale that captured public imagination. This wasn't going away anytime soon. Rebecca's phone buzzed again as she glanced at the encrypted message display. Her expression darkened as she read the contents. "It seems word has reached other interested parties. I'm getting messages from former colleagues, some offering support, others asking if I need backup." "That's good, right?" Tommy asked. "Having people who've got your back." "It's complicated," Rebecca replied. "These aren't the kind of people who do things halfway. If they think I'm in danger, they might take preemptive action that could complicate your investigation." Agent Walsh's eyes sharpened. "What kind of preemptive action?" "The kind that would make your jobs much easier but wouldn't look good in court," Rebecca said carefully. "Former special operations personnel, tend to have permanent solutions to temporary problems. The implication hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Rebecca's former colleagues weren't bound by rules of evidence or constitutional protections. If they perceived the Desert Vipers as a threat to one of their own, the criminal organization might simply disappear one night, leaving nothing but questions that would never be answered. "I need to make some calls," Rebecca said, standing up. "Explain that this is being handled through proper legal channels and that any extracurricular activities would be counterproductive." As she stepped outside to make her calls, Detective Richardson turned to Agent Walsh. "Did we just witness someone calling off a hit squad?" "I think we just witnessed someone with the connections to do exactly that, choosing to work within the system instead," Walsh replied. "That woman could have ended this entire situation last night with a few phone calls. Instead, she's trusting us to deliver justice through the courts." Through the window, they watched Rebecca speaking quietly into her encrypted phone, her posture relaxed but alert. Even in civilian clothes, she moved with the fluid grace of someone always prepared for violence, even while working to prevent it. "The preliminary arrests start tonight," Detective Richardson said, reviewing the evidence files. "We've got enough to hold Thompson and his lieutenants while we build the larger case. The financial crimes alone will keep them locked up for years." Tommy wiped down tables nearby, still processing everything he'd learned about his coworker. "She's been here 8 months, he said to no one in particular. 8 months of serving coffee and cleaning tables, and I never suspected she was anything other than a quiet woman who kept to herself." Agent Walsh looked up from his files. That's probably exactly what she wanted. Combat veterans, especially ones with her kind of record, often struggle with civilian life. She found a place where she could be useful without being special, where she could serve people without having to kill them. And then these criminals forced her to be special again, Detective Richardson added. They couldn't leave well enough alone. Rebecca returned from her phone calls, her expression grim but determined. "It's handled. My former colleagues understand. This is a law enforcement matter now, but they want updates on the progress of the case. And if the case doesn't progress to their satisfaction?" Agent Walsh asked. Rebecca's smile was cold enough to freeze coffee. "Then Murphy's Roadhouse becomes the safest square mile in California, and the Desert Vipers become a cautionary tale told around campfires." The message was clear. Justice would be served one way or another. The only question was whether it would happen in a courtroom or in the shadows where Rebecca's former colleagues operated. For everyone's sake, the legal system better deliver. As the afternoon wore on, Rebecca found herself caught between two worlds again. The civilian life she'd built at Murphy's, serving coffee and seeking anonymity, and the warrior identity that had defined her for so many years. The events of the previous night had shattered the barrier between them, and she was still trying to figure out where that left her. What she did know was that Vincent Thompson and his crew had made a fatal error in judgment. They'd awakened something they couldn't handle, and now they would face the consequences of threatening the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time. The reckoning was just beginning. 3 days after the confrontation at Murphy's Roadhouse, the carefully orchestrated takedown of the Desert Vipers began with the precision of a military operation. Rebecca Martinez stood in the federal building's observation room, watching through one-way glass as Vincent Thompson sat shackled to a metal chair, his swagger completely gone. The man who had terrorized small business owners across 3 counties now looked exactly like what he was, a career criminal facing the rest of his life in prison. His expensive leather vest had been replaced with an orange jumpsuit, and the snake tattoo that had once intimidated victims now seemed pathetic and childish. "He's been asking for a lawyer every 10 minutes for the past 6 hours, Detective," Richardson said, joining Rebecca at the window. but he keeps making statements before his attorney arrives. Amazing how scared people get chatty. Agent Walsh entered the observation room carrying a thick file folder. We've arrested 8 of the 10 crew members. The other 2 fled the state, but we've got warrants out and their photos distributed to every law enforcement agency in the country. Rebecca watched as Thompson fidgeted in his chair, occasionally glancing toward the one-way mirror as if he could sense her presence on the other side. The fear in his eyes was a stark contrast to the cocky predator who had grabbed her arm 3 nights ago. "What's he saying?" she asked. "Everything," Agent Walsh replied with satisfaction. "He's trying to minimize his own involvement by throwing everyone else under the bus. Financial records, locations of stolen goods, details about the arson cases. He's giving us enough evidence to expand this investigation into organized crime. Families in Nevada and Arizona." The irony wasn't lost on Rebecca. The same man who had demanded respect through violence was now desperately seeking mercy by betraying everyone who had ever trusted him. It was a pattern she'd seen in combat. Bullies always revealed their true cowardice when they faced real consequences. "The preliminary hearing is set for next week," Detective Richardson said. "Your testimony will be crucial for establishing the pattern of intimidation and extortion. Are you prepared for what the defense attorneys are going to try?" Rebecca nodded grimly. "They'll attack my credibility by questioning my military service, suggest I'm unstable due to combat trauma, maybe even claim I fabricated evidence because of some personal vendetta against bikers." "Exactly," Agent Walsh confirmed. "They'll try to paint you as a vigilante who overstepped her authority. The fact that you've been conducting surveillance on their client for months won't help." "Let them try," Rebecca said quietly. "I've got documentation for every piece of evidence I collected, timestamps on every photograph, and witnesses to corroborate the criminal activities I observed. My military training taught me how to build airtight intelligence packages." Through the glass, they watched as Thompson's court-appointed attorney finally arrived, a harried-looking public defender who immediately began reviewing the charges with obvious dismay. 14 counts of extortion, 6 counts of arson conspiracy, 8 counts of assault, and enough financial crimes to add decades to any potential sentence. "The media circus is getting worse," Detective Richardson warned. 3 more news trucks showed up this morning, and someone leaked your military records to a blogger. There are already people calling you a hero, and others questioning whether you used excessive force. Rebecca sighed, running her hand through her dark hair. The peaceful anonymity she'd worked so hard to build was crumbling more completely with each passing hour. "I never wanted to be a symbol for anything. I just wanted to serve coffee and live quietly." "Too late for that now," Agent Walsh said gently. "Like it or not, you've become the face of standing up to organized crime. The business owners these criminals terrorized are calling you their guardian angel." Tommy appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable in the federal building's sterile environment. "Sorry to bother you, Rebecca, but there's something you need to know." Murphy called from Phoenix. "He says someone's been asking questions about you, trying to find out your real background." Rebecca's expression hardened. "What kind of someone?" "Professional type. Expensive suit, government credentials, asking about your employment history and why you're working at a roadhouse instead of something more suited to your qualifications." Agent Walsh and Detective Richardson exchanged concerned glances. The last thing they needed was additional complications while building their case against the Desert Vipers. "There'd be federal background investigators," Agent Walsh suggested. "Your testimony is going to be high profile. They might be doing enhanced security clearance checks." But Rebecca's instincts, honed through years of combat and covert operations, were telling her something different. or it could be someone working for the criminal organizations these arrests are going to impact. Taking down the Desert Vipers is going to create opportunities for other groups, but it's also going to make enemies. The weight of that realization settled over the room like a storm cloud. Rebecca's decision to step forward as a witness hadn't just ended her quiet civilian life. It had potentially painted a target on her back from criminal organizations across the Southwest. "We can arrange protection," Detective Richardson offered. "Safe house, new identity if necessary." Rebecca's laugh was short and bitter. "Detective, I've spent the last 3 years trying to disappear and live normally. I'm not about to go underground again because some criminals think they can intimidate me." She turned away from the observation window, her decision made. "I'll testify. I'll help you put these predators away, and then I'll deal with whatever consequences follow. But I won't run, and I won't hide." Agent Walsh studied her carefully. "Gunnery Sergeant, with all due respect, the criminal organizations connected to the Desert Vipers have resources you might not be prepared for. Professional assassins, corrupt law enforcement contacts, enough money to make problems disappear permanently." "Agent Walsh," Rebecca replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had faced death and survived. "Those criminal organizations should be worried about me, not the other way around. They have no idea what they're dealing with." Truth of that statement hung in the air like a promise of violence. Rebecca Martinez had spent 3 tours eliminating high-value targets in some of the world's most dangerous places. If criminal organizations wanted to make this personal, they were about to discover that they had chosen the wrong enemy dot as they prepared to leave the federal building. Rebecca's encrypted phone buzzed with an incoming message. She glanced at the screen and her expression grew cold. "What is it?" Tommy asked, noticing her reaction. "A text from an unknown number," Rebecca said quietly. "It says, 'Desert Vipers have friends you haven't met yet. Drop the charges or meet them soon. Agent.'" Walsh immediately began making calls to trace the message's origin, but Rebecca was already thinking 3 steps ahead. The war these criminals thought they were starting had already been lost. They just didn't know it yet. The trap was closing, but not in the way the Desert Vipers' allies had planned. They had just threatened a force recon Marine with connections to the most lethal operators in the military. What happened next would depend entirely on how far they were willing to push someone who had already sacrificed everything for principle. Rebecca Martinez was done hiding, done pretending to be ordinary, done serving coffee while predators threatened innocent people. The criminals had awakened something they couldn't control, and now they would learn why Marines are called the deadliest force on Earth. The real reckoning was about to begin. The threat came at dawn on the morning of Rebecca's scheduled testimony, delivered with the surgical precision of professionals who understood psychological warfare. Tommy discovered it when he arrived early to open Murphy's Roadhouse. A single photograph slipped under the front door, showing Rebecca walking to her car the previous evening, crosshairs drawn over her image in red ink. "They're escalating," Agent Walsh said grimly as he examined the photograph in Murphy's back office, now transformed into a temporary command center. Professional surveillance, high-quality camera equipment, timing designed for maximum psychological impact before your court appearance. Rebecca stood at the window overlooking the parking lot, her bearing calm despite the obvious threat. She'd faced similar intimidation tactics in Iraq and Afghanistan, where insurgents had tried to break her resolve before major operations. It hadn't worked then, and it wouldn't work now. "Any word on tracing yesterday's text message?" she asked without turning around. Detective Richardson shook her head. "Burner phone purchased with cash. Message sent from a location with no security cameras. These aren't amateur criminals anymore. Someone with serious resources is backing the remaining Desert Vipers operations." Sheriff Coleman entered the back room, his weathered face grim with news. "Rebecca, we've got problems." 3 more businesses reported being approached by men claiming to represent Vincent Thompson's interests. They're demanding the business owners refuse to testify at the trial. "Let me guess," Rebecca said, finally turning from the window. "Well-dressed. Professionals, not the usual biker thugs. Speaking in legal terms about the dangers of cooperating with federal investigations." "Exactly. How did you know?" Rebecca's smile was cold as winter steel. "Because whoever's backing this operation has money, connections, and enough intelligence about law enforcement procedures to know that witness intimidation requires finesse, not crude threats." Agent Walsh spread surveillance photos across the table, images captured by federal teams watching known Desert Vipers associates. "We've identified at least 6 individuals with no previous connection to motorcycle clubs making contact with potential witnesses. Background checks show they're connected to organized crime families in Las Vegas and Phoenix." The implications were staggering. What had started as a local criminal organization was revealing connections to interstate crime syndicates with resources that dwarfed anything the Desert Vipers had possessed independently. "They're treating you as a priority target," Detective Richardson observed. "The surveillance, the threats, the witness intimidation campaign. They understand that your testimony is the keystone holding this entire prosecution together." Rebecca moved to the table where her military records lay spread alongside evidence files from the Desert Vipers investigation. The contrast was striking. Years of commendations for courage under fire next to documentation of crimes committed by men who preyed on the defenseless. "Then let's give them what they're asking for," she said quietly. The room fell silent. Tommy, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward with concern written across his young face. "Rebecca, you can't be serious. These people are talking about killing you." "Tommy," Rebecca replied gently, "these people have been killing innocent business owners and terrorizing families for years. The only difference now is that they're threatening someone who can actually fight back." Agent Walsh leaned forward, his expression serious. "Gunnery Sergeant, I understand your desire to see justice done, but we can arrange alternative testimony methods. Video deposition, closed-circuit testimony, witness protection relocation. You don't have to put yourself directly in harm's way." Rebecca picked up one of the surveillance photos showing a young woman crying outside her vandalized restaurant, another victim of the Desert Vipers protection racket. "Agent Walsh, I've spent 3 years hiding from who I used to be, trying to pretend that part of my life didn't matter anymore. But it does matter. It matters when innocent people need someone to stand up for them." She gestured toward the evidence spread across the table. Every business owner they've terrorized, every family they've threatened, every person who's been afraid to speak up because they didn't think anyone would protect them. They all matter more than my personal safety. Sheriff Coleman nodded slowly, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You're not just talking about testifying, are you? You're talking about drawing them out." "The threats prove they're desperate," Rebecca continued. "They know that without intimidating witnesses, their organization falls apart. So they'll keep escalating until they either silence me or eliminate me entirely." Detective Richardson looked alarmed. "That's not law enforcement procedure, Gunnery Sergeant. We can't use you as bait to draw out criminal organizations." "You're not using me as anything," Rebecca replied firmly. "I'm choosing to testify because it's the right thing to do. If criminal organizations want to respond to that testimony with violence, they'll discover that some targets fight back." Agent Walsh was already shaking his head. "The liability issues alone would end careers. We can't sanction a plan that deliberately puts a witness in danger." "Then don't sanction it," Rebecca said simply. "I'll testify as scheduled, and if criminals want to make that personal, I'll handle the situation using skills the United States Marine Corps spent considerable time and money teaching me. The weight of her words settled over the room like a physical presence. Here was someone who had survived 3 combat tours against enemies with military training and unlimited brutality. If organized crime families wanted to escalate this into personal warfare, they were about to discover they had chosen the wrong opponent. Tommy moved closer to the table, his voice uncertain. What about the people who care about you? What about Murphy's, the customers, everyone who considers you family now? Rebecca's expression softened slightly. Tommy, for 8 months, this place has been my sanctuary. You've all given me something I thought I'd lost forever. A sense of belonging, of purpose that didn't involve violence. But these criminals took that away the moment they walked through our door. She paused, looking around the room at faces that had become familiar and dear. I can either run again, spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder while predators hurt innocent people, or I can stand my ground and end this permanently. And if you don't survive the standing? Sheriff Coleman asked quietly. Rebecca's hand moved unconsciously to the dog tags beneath her shirt, touching the metal that connected her to fallen comrades who had faced the same choice. Then I'll have died for something that matters, protecting people who deserve protection. That's a better ending than most Marines get. The silence that followed was broken by Agent Walsh's phone ringing. He answered quickly, his expression growing increasingly grim as he listened to the caller. We've got a problem, he said after hanging up. Vincent Thompson was found dead in his cell an hour ago. Apparent suicide, but the timing is suspicious. Rebecca felt something cold settle in her stomach. Professional criminals didn't eliminate their own people unless they were desperately trying to prevent testimony that could expose larger operations. They're tying up loose ends, she said quietly, which means they view this as an existential threat to their organization. They'll keep escalating until everyone who can testify against them is dead or too terrified to speak. Detective Richardson was already making calls to arrange additional security for other witnesses, but Rebecca knew it was too late for half measures. The criminal organizations backing the Desert Vipers had declared war, and wars were only won by those willing to fight them to completion. The testimony happens as scheduled, Rebecca said with finality. But I want everyone to understand, after today, this stops being a law enforcement matter and becomes something else entirely. The message was clear to everyone in the room. Rebecca Martinez was done being a victim, done hiding, done letting criminals believe they could intimidate her into silence. Tomorrow's testimony would either end this conflict through legal means, or it would begin a different kind of resolution entirely. The Force Recon Marine was preparing for her final mission, and this time, she wasn't taking prisoners. The courthouse. Steps were lined with media crews and curious onlookers as Rebecca Martinez walked through the morning sun toward what everyone knew would be the most important testimony in the county's recent history. She wore a simple black suit that couldn't quite hide the scars on her neck, her bearing calm and purposeful despite the death threats that had escalated throughout the week. Agent Walsh flanked her left side, Detective Richardson her right, but Rebecca moved with the confident stride of someone who had walked into much more dangerous situations with far less support. The encrypted phone in her jacket pocket had been buzzing all morning with messages from former military colleagues offering backup, but she declined them all. This was her fight, and she would finish it on her terms. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez. A reporter called out, "Are you concerned about the threats against your life if you testify today?" Rebecca paused on the courthouse steps, looking directly into the cameras with the same steady gaze that had once stared down insurgent snipers. "I'm concerned about the families these criminals have terrorized. I'm concerned about the business. Owners have been afraid to speak up. If criminals think they can silence witnesses through intimidation, they've chosen the wrong person to test that theory on." Inside the courtroom, The atmosphere was electric with tension. The prosecution table was stacked with evidence files that Rebecca had helped compile, while the defense table looked notably sparse. With Vincent Thompson dead, and most of his crew either arrested or fled, the remaining defendants sat like condemned men, watching their last hope walk through the door. District Attorney Michael Foster approached Rebecca as she took her place. In the witness box, Gunnery Sergeant Martinez, please state your name and occupation for the record. Rebecca Elena Martinez, former Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, 1st Force Reconnaissance Battalion. Currently employed as a server at Murphy's Roadhouse. The contrast between her military credentials and civilian occupation sent a murmur through the courtroom. Here was someone who had chosen service over recognition, anonymity over acclaim, until circumstances had forced her to step back into the light. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez, can you describe the events of the evening when you first encountered the defendants? Rebecca's testimony was precise, methodical, and devastating. She recounted every detail of the Desert Viper's extortion attempt, their threats of violence, their pattern of criminal activity against local businesses. Her voice never wavered, her facts never fluctuated, her credibility unassailable. The defendant Vincent Thompson grabbed my arm and stated that he would teach the entire bar a lesson about respect, she continued. He then destroyed my shirt, while threatening to burn down Murphy's Roadhouse if we didn't pay $5,000 monthly for protection services. Defense attorney Patricia Wells rose for cross-examination, her strategy immediately apparent. Ms. Martinez, isn't it true that you've been conducting unauthorized surveillance on my clients for months before this alleged incident? I documented criminal activities I observed while working at Murphy's Roadhouse, Rebecca replied calmly. Citizens have both the right and the responsibility to report crimes to law enforcement. But you didn't report these alleged crimes immediately, did you? Instead, you compiled an intelligence dossier using military-grade equipment and techniques. Isn't that vigilante behavior? Rebecca's expression never changed. Counselor, I served 3 tours in combat zones where inadequate intelligence cost Marine lives. When I observed criminal activity threatening my community, I applied the same standards of documentation I used to protect my fellow Marines. Every photograph is time-stamped. Every recording is authenticated. Every piece of evidence is corroborated. Wells tried a different approach. You suffered significant combat trauma during your military service, didn't you? Post-traumatic stress, night terrors, difficulty adjusting to civilian life? Yes, Rebecca replied without hesitation. I carry scars from my service, both visible and invisible. But those scars don't affect my ability to distinguish between criminal behavior and lawful conduct. If anything, they've made me more committed to protecting innocent people from predators. The defense attorney's strategy was backfiring spectacularly. Every attempt to undermine Rebecca's credibility only highlighted her qualifications, her integrity, and her courage. The jury was watching a decorated war hero calmly explaining how she'd risked her life to protect her community. No further questions, Wells said, recognizing defeat. District Attorney Foster stood for redirect examination. Gunnery Sergeant Martinez, why did you choose to work at Murphy's Roadhouse instead of pursuing opportunities more suited to your military background? Rebecca was quiet for a moment, her gaze moving across the courtroom to where Tommy sat in the gallery alongside other Murphy's regulars who had come to support her. I came to Murphy's because I wanted to serve people without having to hurt anyone, she said finally. I wanted to pour coffee and clean tables and remember what it felt like to be normal. I thought I could leave the warrior behind and just be Rebecca, the woman who makes sure your glass is never empty. A voice carried clearly through the silent courtroom. But these defendants took that choice away from me. They threatened my workplace, my colleagues, my community. They forced me to remember that sometimes peace has to be defended, that sometimes good people have to stand up to predators, even when they'd rather just serve coffee and live quietly. The impact of her words was profound. Several jurors were visibly moved, and even the judge seemed affected by the raw honesty of her testimony. "Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant Martinez," Foster said. "No further questions." As Rebecca stepped down from the witness box, she felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving the military: the satisfaction of mission completion. She had done her duty, honored her oath to protect and defend, and ensured that justice would be served. The trial continued for 2 more days, but the outcome was never in doubt. Rebecca's testimony had provided the foundation for convictions on all major charges. The remaining Desert Vipers defendants received sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years in federal prison. The organized crime families that had backed them quietly retreated, recognizing that their intimidation campaign had failed completely. 3 months later, Murphy's Roadhouse had transformed into something extraordinary. The walls now featured military memorabilia donated by veterans from across the state. Tuesday nights had become Veterans Night, with Rebecca quietly facilitating conversations between service members struggling with civilian transition. A small library of military history books occupied one corner, and the local VFW had established a scholarship fund in honor of Lance Corporal Williams and PFC Thompson, Rebecca's fallen comrades. "You know," Tommy said one evening as they cleaned up after the dinner rush, "I've been thinking about enlisting." Rebecca looked up from the table she was wiping down, studying his young face carefully. "Because of what happened here?" "Partly, but mostly because of what you represent. Service, sacrifice, something bigger than yourself." Rebecca folded the cleaning cloth with her characteristic precision. "Tommy, the Corps will take everything you have to give, ask for more. Be sure you're willing to pay that price. Were you willing?" Rebecca's hand moved unconsciously to her dog tags, no longer hidden beneath her shirt, but worn openly as a reminder of who she was and what she stood for. "Every damn day, Tommy, and I'd do it again. But that's me. You need to find your own." Answer. As the evening wound down, Rebecca found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She was no longer the broken veteran trying to disappear into civilian anonymity, nor was she the naive 18-year-old who had enlisted full of patriotic fervor. She was something new, something forged in the crucible of service and tempered by the choice to serve again in a different way. The eagle, globe, and anchor on her back, once hidden like a shameful secret, now stood as a beacon for everyone who entered Murphy's Roadhouse. Here was sacred ground where veterans were understood, civilians were welcomed, and everyone was treated with dignity. Here, a United States Marine stood watch, not with a rifle but with a coffee pot, not in a combat zone but in a roadside bar. Still serving, still protecting, still faithful. Rebecca Martinez had found her peace not in hiding from war, but in continuing to serve in peace. She had learned that warriors don't stop being warriors when they take off the uniform. They just find new battles worth fighting, new people worth protecting, new ways to honor the oath they took to defend those who cannot defend themselves. And Murphy's Roadhouse would never be the same Dot as she locked up for the night. Rebecca's reflection caught in the mirror behind the bar. The woman looking back wasn't the terrified civilian the Desert Vipers had tried to intimidate, nor was she the hardened killer who had survived 3 combat tours. She was something better, a guardian who had chosen to stand watch over her community, a warrior who had found her mission in the most unlikely place. The threats had ended. The criminals were in prison. The innocent were safe. Mission accomplished. Semper Fidelis, always faithful to the course, to her fallen brothers, to her new mission. Rebecca Martinez had finally come home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.